I have an amendment at the desk. It's Lee Amendment number 1.
Clerk will read.
An amendment offered by Ms. Lee.
Would you consider it read?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
This amendment would strike the $65 million for the new low-yield nuclear warhead that was included in the bill, and instead it would transfer the money to nuclear non-proliferation accounts. Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to offer and withdraw my amendment. But let me just explain a bit about this amendment. It would strike one of the most harmful and controversial recommendations of the Trump Nuclear Posture Review. The warhead funded in this bill would set a very dangerous precedent, that of arming our submarines with a low-yield ballistic missile, something that has really never been done in the many decades of our nuclear deterrence. What's worse, funding this warhead lowers the threshold for nuclear weapons use and could put us on a dangerous path to war. At a time when we should be reducing the threat of nuclear war, indeed at a time we are asking other nations to contribute to reducing this threat, we are doing just the opposite. By including $65 million for this warhead in the bill, we are running the risk of miscalculation in a crisis. And we all know that the current U.S. nuclear arsenal is already more powerful and credible enough to deter and respond to any threat. So why do we need more types of warheads, Mr. Chairman? As General John Hyten, the commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, noted in March, he said, "I have everything I need today to deter Russia from doing anything against the United States of America. We're fully ready against any threat that exists today without a doubt." And while the Trump administration claims that another low-yield warhead will help deter Russia from using these weapons first, that's far from the truth. In fact, funding this nuclear weapon in this bill could empower and encourage Russia to use their own weapon first. Let me be clear, the additional funding, it's really unnecessary. Our nation already possesses hundreds of low-yield warheads as part of the air leg of the triad, and we are investing over $150 billion in the coming decades. Frankly, our nation shouldn't just rely on building more nuclear weapons. We must ensure that diplomacy is our nation's first pathway to address these global challenges. DOE's nuclear non-proliferation program builds on our diplomatic strength and plays a central role in our national security by securing nuclear materials both here at home and globally. The non-proliferation program also helps verify compliance with treaties and arms control agreements and develops technologies that strengthen the safeguard and the mission of the IAEA. So I hope you will join me in supporting this critical amendment, or at least the sentiment of the amendment. As I said earlier, I'm definitely going to withdraw it, but I would like for consideration of what I'm talking about, because this is a very dangerous first step.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Chairman Simpson, and then Mr. Serrano wishes to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to speak in opposition to the amendment. I'd like to recognize my colleagues' concerns regarding the new nuclear weapons program, nuclear warhead program called for in the Nuclear Posture Review that was released early in February. I agree that the committee needs to have more information on this and other new proposals to modernize the nuclear weapons stockpile to meet the evolving threat. The manager's amendment contains a new reporting requirement on the W76-2 modification program to address some of the additional details that are needed, and our subcommittee will be holding hearings on this because I share some of the same concerns expressed by the gentlelady from California. I look forward to working with the gentlelady and appreciate her intention to withdraw this amendment.
Mr. Serrano, Ms. Capter is...
That's right. Go ahead with Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Serrano, and then, if I may, Mr. Fortenberry after Mr. Serrano. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I speak in strong support of the Lee Amendment. Developing new low-yield nuclear weapons sends the wrong message about America's commitment to world peace. It will only lead other countries, such as Russia and China, to do the same. At a time when America has the most powerful nuclear arsenal in the world, it is simply unnecessary and a waste of money to develop low-yield nuclear weapons. American security is also economic security. We should use these funds instead on creating jobs for the American people and making sure that our people are financially secure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. Mr. Fortenberry, and then Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. I think Chairman Simpson captured the sentiment here very well, that it's important that we have fullness of information about this new policy dynamic. Sometimes in appropriations, we get caught in the construct of just more money or less money rather than thinking about architecture. And to take the conversation in a bit of a divergent direction, Ms. Lee, Congresswoman Lee mentioned General Hyten. He is a constituent of mine as I represent Strategic Command. In this regard, I do think leveraging the resources and intent of both of the amendment as well as the sentiment that most of us have, or all of us had, to make sure that nuclear weapons are for the purpose of our own national security and safety and as a deterrent. We do need to consider how non-proliferation efforts, along with nuclear modernization, actually are conformed to a new modern emerging era. In this regard, I am working conceptually on an idea. Just as we have a nuclear weapons council, I think we ought to have a nuclear non-proliferation council, a whole of government approach to make sure that the individual accounts and pressures that we are applying with funding actually make sense in the whole. So just a set of comments that your amendment prompted me to make, but I thank the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. Ms. Capter is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I rise in strong support of Ms. Lee's amendment, which she will withdraw. But as I mentioned in my opening statement, the administration only last month made the request of Congress for both the authorization and funding of this new low-yield ballistic missile. This is a significant request from the administration, and one we have had absolutely no time for debate or deliberation in this subcommittee. We certainly didn't have this information during our subcommittee's budget hearings with the Secretary of Energy, nor with his NSA administrator. I asked both about this weapons system during their hearings, and they couldn't even have a discussion with us at that time. As of today, I remain unconvinced that this new low-yield missile will actually improve our nuclear deterrent. We have the most capable and sophisticated nuclear arsenal in the world. It is robust and able to deter and respond to any threat. And as the commander of STRATCOM said to us in March, we're fully ready against any threat, fully ready against any threat that exists today without a doubt. In any case, we owe it to the American people to have a full discussion before wandering down a path to new varieties of nuclear weapons, and that debate should include discussions about security, cost, schedule, and global impact. As such, I lend my full support to Congresswoman Lee, her amendment, and her strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Capter. Ms. Clark is recognized. Gentlewoman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, support Representative Lee's amendment. Additional low-yield options are a solution in search of a problem. The current U.S. nuclear arsenal is already more than powerful enough to deter and respond to any threat. And responding to mere speculation that Russia could be changing its threshold for the first use is a dangerous strategy for this bill and for the security of the United States. As Congresswoman Lee already mentioned, we have hundreds of low-yield warheads now, plus additional plans to invest over $150 billion in the coming decades to ensure these warheads can penetrate the most advanced air defenses. If our current and planned air-launched options cannot deter or respond to Russian actions, why are taxpayers being asked to spend billions of dollars on them? If existing U.S. nuclear and conventional capabilities can't deter Russia, it is hard to argue that greater emphasis on limited nuclear options would change Moscow's calculus. I thank Representative Lee for introducing this important amendment. It is the kind of this response in this bill is the kind of escalatory policy that can only make matters worse, and I urge my colleagues to oppose any language that could put the United States at greater risk of entering into a needless nuclear conflict. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Ms. Lee, a minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of my colleagues for their comments, and also hope that you feel the sense of urgency given the expanded number of scenarios which the United States might consider now, the use of nuclear weapons. We're at that point now where we need to have this full debate. We should never be in a position that the United States is using nuclear weapons first, which would lead us to war. And so I'm withdrawing my amendment, but I hope to work with the chair and a ranking member through this process so we can address these ongoing nuclear funding issues. Thank you again.
Thank you. We thank the gentlewoman for withdrawing her amendment. Pleased to recognize